Good evening. You're watching the main news on HKIBC. I'm Grace Ma. Here's a look at tonight's top stories. Xi Jinping and Joe Biden stressed the need to avoid conflict. Locally suspicious letters forced a partial closure of 2 courts. And about 130 Cathay Pacific cargo pilots are in quarantine after 3 colleagues contract COVID. President Xi Jinping and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden have described their long-awaited virtual summit as candid and fruitful. Their discussions, which lasted more than 3 hours, touched on various issues, with both leaders stressing the need to avoid confrontation. Sarah Wong reports.
President Xi Jinping went into his first video summit with his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden after winning a strong endorsement from the Chinese Communist Party. Xi warmly greeted Biden as an old friend, as the 2 leaders pledged to find a way forward despite bilateral tensions.
中美应该相互尊重、和平共处、合作共赢。
In his opening remarks, the Chinese leader told Biden that Beijing and Washington should work together to achieve success on the basis of mutual respect and peaceful coexistence. Healthy and stable Sino-U.S. ties, he stressed, are crucial in tackling global challenges, and he vowed to build consensus with Biden to lead their countries forward.
It seems to me our responsibility as leaders of China and the United States to ensure that the competition between our countries does not veer into conflict. None of this is a favor to either of our countries, what we do for one another, but it's just responsible world leadership, and you're a major world leader, and so is the United States. All countries have to play by the same rules of the road, while the United States is always going to stand up for our interests and values and those of our allies and partners.
After their brief public exchange, the 2 presidents spent over 3 hours in closed-door discussions on globalization, energy security, public health, climate, and geopolitics. State media said Biden reiterated that Washington does not support Taiwan independence, as Xi warned of resolute measures if separatist movements gained ground. Xi also opposed external interference in the name of human rights, and Biden pledged not to seek regime change in China. The Chinese leader called for contacts to continue, and he urged Biden to base his China policy on rationality and pragmatism. China and the U.S. are 2 tankers sailing in the sea, Xi stressed. We need to steer the wheels steadily to avoid collision at all costs. Sarah Wong, HKIBC.
There was cautious optimism following the summit between the presidents of China and the United States. Many people said despite signs of thawing relations, more talks are needed. Wenna Wang reports.
The historic meeting between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden made many wonder whether the icy relations between the 2 countries can finally melt. Vice Foreign Minister Xie Feng, who manages China's relations with the United States, called the talks frank and constructive. The meeting sets a direction for Sino-U.S. relations and injects new momentum, he said. This was echoed by Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian. China has no illusions but is confident that it will continue to maintain its strength, he said. China is open to all options that are conducive to the development of Sino-U.S. relations. On the streets of Beijing, there was cautious optimism. I personally feel an in-person meeting would make things even clearer, said this resident of the capital, adding that a virtual summit is still a good start. More needs to be done in regards to Taiwan, said this woman. She said some on the island believe in independence, so solving this problem will be an important aspect of improving Sino-U.S. relations. In Taiwan, Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokeswoman Joanne Oh expressed confidence that the U.S. would not back down when it came to the island. The Biden administration has repeatedly reiterated that the United States' commitment to Taiwan is rock solid, she said. Winna Wang, HKIBC.
Locally, the West Kowloon and Shatin magistracies were evacuated today after they received suspicious letters. The letters containing white powder were addressed to 2 judges who handled protest-related cases. Officers from the Explosive Ordnance Disposal Bureau rushed to West Kowloon Magistracy after a suspicious letter arrived this morning. They were accompanied by the police counter-terrorism response unit and firefighters. They evacuated about 30 people from the 3rd floor after staff received an envelope which contained a letter scribbled with profanities and a sachet of white powder. Sources say the recipient was Deputy District Judge Kathy Chen, whose office is in Tower A of the complex. Chen received a similar letter which arrived last Thursday in an envelope which also contained caustic soda powder. She has tried protest-related cases, including one last month when 5 Chinese university students were convicted of rioting and sentenced to jail for more than 4 years. Over the Shatin Law Courts building, Magistrate Pang Lun-Ting also received a suspicious letter. Pang had jailed 2 protesters for up to 11 months for assaulting police in Chunwan 2 years ago. The emergency incidents forced the partial closure of the West Kowloon and Shatin magistracies until 2:30 p.m. The chief executive says about 130 Cathay Pacific cargo pilots have been sent to mandatory quarantine because of the recent imported cluster among the airline's air crew. Carrie Lim admitted that the move has had an impact on the city's economy. Alman reports.
From tomorrow, Cathay Pacific aircrew have to follow stricter restrictions after returning from overseas flights, although they will still be exempted from compulsory quarantine. On the first 3 days after coming back, they can only spend up to 2 hours daily outside their home for essential activities, such as buying food or getting medical attention. The new rules were drawn up after 3 Cathay cargo pilots were infected on their return from Germany. The Transport and Housing Bureau helped draft the tighter measures.
The government, together with the airline, that is Cathay Pacific, have been in close discussion over the last few days, and various enhancement measures have been imposed as a result of those discussions.
Authorities also ordered a 21-day quarantine for other aircrew who stayed in the same German hotel as the infected pilots. Lam reviewed there were 130 of them. She said the decision has had an impact on Hong Kong's logistics and economy. But she stressed that the infection of the 3 pilots has not affected discussions with the mainland on reopening the border. Lam refused to tighten quarantine exemption to cover people like cross-border truck drivers, saying they are vital in keeping the SAR running. Amelie, HKIBC.
Carrie Lim confirmed that a top U.S. banker was allowed to skip quarantine just days after Hong Kong tightened exemption rules. She said the exception made for Jamie Dimon, the chief executive of J.P. Morgan Chase, was based on economic reasons. She called J.P. Morgan Chase a very big bank, adding that Dimon's itinerary was restricted and the risks manageable. The banker arrived yesterday for a 32-hour visit. Hong Kong has now gone 39 days without a local COVID infection, but there was one imported case today. A woman who arrived from India 2 days ago was found to be infected with a mutant strain. Health authorities, meanwhile, say a dozen environmental samples taken from a Tung Chung hotel were positive. The samples were collected after 2 guests at the 4 Points by Sheraton tested positive earlier during quarantine. 44 others who stayed on the 15th floor have been isolated. The chief executive has remained tight-lipped over why the work visa of a correspondent for The Economist magazine was not renewed. But Carrie Lam pledged to help foreign journalists work in the city as long as they don't break the law. Annie Lau reports.
Speaking before her weekly cabinet meeting, Carrie Lam refused to comment on the decision not to renew the work visa of Australian journalist Su Lin Wang, the China correspondent of The Economist. Lam said all governments have the right to decide whether or not to issue a visa to a foreign national.
Standing here as the chief executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, I've been denied visa into the United States of America. Although I would dispute that, but that was the autonomy and the discretion of the U.S. government.
But Lam pledged to facilitate the work of foreign reporters as long as they obey the law, including the national security law. The decision by the Immigration Department not to renew Wang's visa was criticized by the Foreign Correspondents Club. It expressed concern about the possible shrinking of press freedom, but this was dismissed by the Foreign Ministry. Spokesman Zhao Lijian said as of April, 628 employees of foreign media organizations held work visas in Hong Kong, 98 more than last year. He said the number of foreign staff working for The Economist in Hong Kong has jumped by 22% over the past year. Annie Lau, HKIBC.
And coming up after the break. A Russian missile test scares the crew of the International Space Station.